Okay, there's all right. So we can see your screen. So how about we stop for a minute? And Joe, would you like to introduce Peter?
Gladly. So Peter Marbach has been doing landscape photography for over 30 years, and he's authored several coffee table books and has numerous regional and national publication credits. His 2019 book, Healing the Big River, Salmon Dreams, and the Columbia River Treaty, was a 10-year project, which included traveling the Columbia River from the headwaters in Canada all the way to the Pacific coast. I think he dog paddled most of that, but I'm not sure. He's been working with the tribes and First Nations in their quest to restore salmon runs of the Columbia. And he just recently returned from Nepal, where he's been doing volunteer work supporting individual and educational advancement for women. Projects have been featured in the Oregon Field Guide, OPB's Think Out Loud, and on KGW's Grants Giveaways. In May of 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, Peter began a 2-year project with the Oregon Historical Society to document the best of Oregon's state park systems, timed to celebrate the centennial of 2022 of Oregon's treasured parks. And that ended up as the exhibit that was at Oregon Historical Society, Hood River, and several other places as well. Peter was recently commissioned by the Oregon Historical Society to create imagery for a 2023 exhibit, Portland Past and Present, locating and recreating contemporary images of historical scenes in Portland. Peter's an avid hiker and backpacker. He has hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, the Appalachian Trail, and did a 600-mile trek across England and Scotland. And when hiking, he often finds himself at the right place at the right time for some amazing scenic art photography. So I first met Peter in about 2009, and we did some guiding trips for Oregon Peak Adventures. And we organized a photo tour of China and Tibet, where we were going to hike around Mount Kailash. Unfortunately, that was in 2012, but unfortunately, we didn't have enough clients to actually run the trip. Too bad. It would have been awesome. So I'm so pleased to have Peter Marbach share his photography with us. Peter?
Thanks so much, Joe. Great to see you and connect with you again after all these years. Maybe someday we can still do that Tibet trip. But anyway, my apologies, folks, on the technology stuff. This is it just happens, so it's okay as long as you can hear me and see my photos. Thanks again for the invitation, Joe. Just a brief background here. When Joe invited me to give this talk, I was a little bit uncertain about what to do. He just said, "Oh, just talk about your life as a photographer." And I've never given a talk quite like that before. Most of my talks are for specific projects, like books that I did, or like some of the things that Joe mentioned. So I just got to thinking, with all of you photographers, many of you are far more skilled than I will ever be. I'm just crazy enough to try to make a living at this. But so the theme of my talk is just going to be talking about how I started off as a landscape photographer and then gradually shifted to projects that called out to the community service, social service part of my brain and my life. So if you can see this first photo here, this is a self-portrait of me standing on the summit of Mount Hood. Now, besides the thrill of having National Geographic select it for a map that they did about the Cascades, this was a very poignant moment in my life, which kind of changed the direction of my life and my career. I had a year before that, I had unexpected open heart surgery. Come on. I am trying to advance this and it's not working. You hear me?
Peter, try hitting your escape key. See if you can just get out of that for a minute.
Yeah, hold on, folks. I was hitting the down arrow and it wouldn't.
Try the right arrow. No?
Let's see. This is rather difficult. Let's see. Should I go into new share? I'm sorry, Mark, this worked.
No, you're fine. I'm going to ask for remote control.
You know what? Go ahead. So sorry.
Yeah, you have to
This,
approve it.
this is
There we go.
ridiculous. Wow, wow, wow. Okay. So if you heard what I said, a year before that photo of me standing in Summit Mount Hood, I underwent triple bypass open heart surgery, kind of an emergency. It kind of caught me off guard, threw me for a loop emotionally, physically, but to be able to get back up on the top of Mount Hood, which is my office, and be able to continue my life as a photographer and climber, that was quite the gift. But it was on that particular climb where I made a promise to both the mountain and to the Columbia River to, at some point in my life, work on projects to thank the mountain and the river for bringing me back to health, because it was many months of rehab, hiking along the Columbia River. And when I could once again stand on the summit of Mount Hood and watch the sunrise, I felt like I was completely whole again. So that kind of really inspired me to have a second chance on life and use my camera for greater good, so to speak. Go ahead, Mark.
You tried. I think you have control now.
Okay. Oh, yay. All right. Thank you so much. So I'm sure some of you have climbed Mount Hood before, and I've climbed it every year, multiple times for the last 30 years. This is one of my more favorite images from the summit. I had, as usual, tried to get up there before sunrise to catch the magic light. I got up to the top, and there was this other climber coming from a different direction. And he's up there in the top. And at first I was a little bit annoyed because I wanted like a pure landscape shot. But then when I saw him raising his arms, just celebrating the joy of summiting at sunrise, I thought, here's a moment. So it ended up becoming one of my favorite images, and just shows the joy of celebrating a successful climb. But when you get up there and you see that kind of light, and then you see this happening at the same time, I think Joe Whittington has probably climbed Mount Hood many times, and he can attest to this. While that sunrise light is coming up, right over your shoulder, if you turn around looking to the west, this incredible pyramid shadow formed, but it only lasts for maybe 30 to 45 seconds. So you have to be aware and cognizant this has happened, and you have to be very careful because you're standing on the precipice of Mount Hood, and 2 steps forward and you can fall down to Elliott Glacier. So I had to turn around very carefully, make sure my feet were planted on solid ground, fire off a few of these shots. So both of those images took place in less than a minute. But that's why I climb, because the light is just so beautiful. So I started a little over 30 years ago, and it took a while to break in, to get some work. I would say my breakthrough moment of getting any kind of name recognition was in 1997. Those of you who've been around Portland long enough who are familiar with the Mount Hood Festival of Jazz, it was a pretty big deal back then. They had a big budget, and you had to compete for the job. And from 97 through 99, myself and the graphic arts partner, Chaz Martin, we won the contract every year. So that recognition, that publicity kind of gave me a little bit of momentum to get my career going, because as you all know, there are so many gifted photographers here in the Northwest. So to try to find your niche, to try to get someone to pay attention to you, is a bit of a challenge. So in 2005, my first big breakthrough with a coffee table book. This was with Graphic Arts Center Publishing. It is now sold out and no longer in publication. This was one of those projects that I didn't have the money. I pitched an idea to Graphic Arts Center Publishing, and they said, fine, but we need to get a corporate sponsor. And make a long story short, I approached the Mount Hood National Forest because I knew that all across the country in 2005, national forests were celebrating the centennial of the Forest Service. So I took a chance and pitched the idea that, hey, do you guys want to, do a coffee table book about Mount Hood National Forest? And the supervisor at the time, Gary Larson, it was after 2 years of not finding any money, he talked on the phone. He said, cool, let's do it. I mean, I nearly just dropped my jaw. I mean, for them to just plunk down a bunch of money and help fund the publication of this book. That started a series of my next several books that all followed the same model of publishers wanting to do it, didn't have the money. And so I was willing to go out and try to find corporate sponsors. It's not my favorite way of getting a book published, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do you want to get your story told. So continuing with my love affair with Mount Hood, this was an image I created in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act. I was one of several artists invited to participate in a group gallery show in Hood River. And this is an area up in the Mount Hood wilderness. Let me see, if folks, anyone's hiked up near Barrett Spur, it's just in a little bench in an area east of Barrett Spur. And when I discovered this meadow many years ago, I thought, wow, what a beautiful spot. But you're looking at this photo and it's very clean and organized, but it's very chaotic. There's a lot of boulders. It's kind of messy and raw. But when I sat down on the ground, I noticed that the boulder in the foreground eerily mimicked the shape of the mountain. I thought, okay, there's something here. So it was around noon when I discovered this, and I just sat there till like around 6 p.m. until the light was pretty good. So as you all know, it's all about waiting and being patient. So that very same meadow, I kept going back year after year. And one night when I was camping, I knew that the moon was going to be coming up somewhere around this area. But when it came up exactly where it did, I was just crazy ecstatic. And then the moonlight illuminating the seed pods, those are past flowers. They actually start off as a tiny yellow flower, but these are actually the seeds, and that's not the flower. So this was pretty magical just to stay up most of the night and witness something that's most people don't see. This was another one of those magical moments. I had been hiking all day on a trail up to Yoakum Ridge, and on my way back down, what makes this image special, there were some ladies in a parking lot with a car running, and I got back to the parking lot at Ramona Falls, and they started asking me questions about, how come people die on Mount Hood? And I didn't know what they were talking about. But if any of you remember, there was a young woman who died crossing the Sandy River in that general area, I think way back in, 2004 or something like that. I can't remember. They had all these questions, and I tried to alleviate their concerns that it wasn't their fault and this and that. Anyway, it was a very emotional gathering. On my way home, driving up the Lolo Pass Road, I look out the window and I saw the moon coming up. So this was back when I was shooting film, and I did this long exposure, maybe 40 seconds or something like that. It wasn't until I got home and took a look at the photo up close, you can see to the well, there's a little flare of light coming up from the ridge. That is, the moon is illuminating the sulfur vent up near the Hogsback on Mount Hood. And I thought, oh my God, I've never seen this before. And I shared that with a volcanologist in Washington State, and they said, wow, we've never seen this before. How lucky is that? So I've gone back to that location many, many times over the years and have not been able to replicate that. But that was a pretty special moment. Had I not stopped to chat with these ladies who were mourning the loss of their friend, I would not have witnessed the scene. So it was one of those serendipitous gifts. So I wish we could be talking back and forth. If I was giving a live presentation, I would say, can anybody guess where this is? Many years ago, I saw a historic photo taken around 1910 of a oblong-shaped pond just below the summit of Mount Hood. And having climbed it many, many years, I thought, wow, I've never seen that before. When can you see that? So a few years ago, I started climbing up there around September, because I figured you had to wait until the glacial pond, the glacial snow, and the route going up the Hogsback was pretty well melted out. Anyway, to make a long story short, I finally discovered it, and oh my God, the picture does not do it justice. First of all, it's a hell of a trek to get there. There's no snow. It's around 4,500 feet of just pure blistering boulder scrambling, and then you have to crawl through the devil's kitchen to get there and breathe in all these sulfur fumes. But to be able to see this and get the reflection in the lake, and to know that very few people ever go up there, it was pretty amazing. I keep going back there year after year. I'm still not satisfied with what I got, but it's an amazing thing to see. So if any of you feel inspired or are in good physical shape, I'd recommend you start going up there around early to mid-September and keep going up until it melts out enough, because it's pretty awesome experience. Along those same lines, you may recall that Oregon Field Guide had did a story about this a snow cave on Mount Hood a number of years ago, and I saw this store and I said, "Oh my gosh, I have to go find this." So I did. You know, they were a little vague in this location, but I found it, and I crawled inside the entrance, and all of a sudden you get into this big open, sort of like a snow version of an atrium in a hotel, and you look up at the ceiling, and there would be all these little holes in this very thin ceiling, and above me there were also like basketball-sized rocks just stuck in the ceiling. I looked up and I thought, wow, this could collapse on me any second. I better get the hell out of here. So at least I had a helmet on, I had crampons, but I fired off a few shots, but just a very surreal beauty inside this cave. I don't know if it still exists. I've heard rumors that it might have collapsed. So I was very fortunate to be able to see this. So continuing with mountain photography, many of you may have seen this view before. This is at sunrise from the summit of South Sister. And what I love about this particular climb is that you can see, as you can see here, volcanoes going off to infinity on a clear day, all the way up to Mount Rainier. But again, like a lot of the great photographs, you have to be willing to either hike all through the night, or what I usually do is I camp halfway up the mountain, lug all my gear, and then make sure I get up there in time. And I also, this image is very special to me because I try to honor my heart surgery anniversary. Every year it's on the summer solstice. So this was several years ago on my heart surgery anniversary on the summer solstice at sunrise, and the light was pretty good. So yeah, it's pretty fun. So shifting gears here to the project that Joe mentioned, I spent pretty close to 12 years on self-assignment documenting the entire Columbia River from where it bubbles up out of the ground in a little town called Canal Flats in British Columbia to where it empties into the Pacific Ocean at 3 miles wide. The reason I struck out on this project was because I became aware that the Columbia River, there was a treaty called the Columbia River Treaty that was struck between the United States and Canada back in the early 60s. And this treaty was all about managing flood risks and irrigation needs and hydropower, but it did nothing to alleviate the loss of salmon and affecting the tribal culture upriver of the Grand Coulee Dam. And so I learned that this treaty was going to be renegotiated starting in 2014, and I had a 10-year window to resolve the issues. So I took it upon myself to document this whole river. But more importantly than the photographs, I was able to recruit about 10 tribal leaders from the US and in British Columbia to contribute their stories, their essays for this book project. And so really the photos are more of a serve to illustrate the powerful stories and essays in the history about the Columbia River Treaty. And as I said, 2024 they're supposed to be wrapping up the renegotiations, and we're all hoping and praying that the two countries led by our State Department and Global Affairs Canada do the right thing and honor the tribe's request to restore the salmon runs above the Grand Coulee Dam. So this is a ongoing project. When this is all over, if you guys want to go to my website, this book is for sale. And yeah, it's a pretty impactful story. But that's kind of where I started shifting my life from pure landscapes to using my camera to start educating people about important issues, both here and in Nepal. So I mentioned the headwaters. This is a self-portrait that took me maybe, I don't know, 2.5, 3 hours to get, because it was like one of these sideways rainstorms, ugly gray skies. And I kept waiting and waiting for the light to clear. But this is where the Columbia River starts. It's actually a small little underground spring that bubbles up from a water source in the nearby Kootenai River. And you literally, as you can see, stand there and straddle it. And what you can't see here is that the river begins and it flows between these two massive mountain ranges. You have the Kootenai Rockies on your right, and you have the Purcell Mountains on your left. And the river from there flows about 200 miles wild and free. It is so beautiful, and I wept the first time I saw it. And this is an example of what the river looks like. This is a wetland area, and we're looking across the river west to the Purcell Mountains in British Columbia. And again, just fantastic scenery. This is, I think it's called Houndstooth Spire. in the Bugaboo Mountains, and you can see the glacier here. The river starts at this headwaters, but there are many, many rivers that flow down from it. From this Bugaboo Creek from the glacier is one of the many sources that feed into the Columbia. As we know it here in the gorge, it's this massive river, but up in Canada, it starts off as a wild and free thing. Speaking of which, I got over my fear of getting up in little two-seater planes to try to get an aerial view of what the Columbia River looks like from its headwaters. As you can see, it's just this unbelievably clear, clean, winding back and forth S-curves between two giant mountains, and it really gives you a perspective of what a wild and free river looks like, or maybe what it used to look like here. So along the way, I was able to meet some really amazing tribal leaders. This is a gentleman named Alfred Joseph from the Tunaha Nation, and he was telling me this story about how back in the early 1940s, his grandfather would go down to the shores of the river near the headwaters to welcome home the salmon and to greet them. And when the usual time came, like in May or June, weeks went by and months went by, and there were no fish. And he said his grandfather thought that his people had done something to offend the Creator. But what they didn't know at that time was that the Grand Coulee Dam was nearing completion and had stopped the salmon runs from coming all the way up to the headwaters. And so they're still mourning the loss. It's been some 80 years, so they're still hoping and praying that the salmon runs will be restored, because it's not only affected their economy, but just their spirituality, it's their way of life. Young kids are growing up without the knowledge and experience and wisdom of salmon coming back up there. So, fingers crossed that one day that'll happen. This was a rather exciting and emotional experience for me. The tribes were allowed to do what they call a cultural release of salmon. This is right above the Grand Coulee Dam. And tribal folks came from all over Oregon, Washington, British Columbia to witness this. This was the first time that salmon had been released in over 80 years at the Columbia River Dam, above the Grand Coulee Dam. So there was a lot of emotions, a lot of prayers and singing. And where I was standing in the water, when he released that salmon, it brushed right through my legs, and I felt this jolt of electricity go up my spine, and my hair just was all electric. And I watched this salmon swim away up the river, and it was very exciting and very encouraging, because the tribes up there, especially the Koval tribe, they are engaging in their own project where they are tagging the fish, and they are proving that the fish will go all the way up to the Canadian border, and they're trying to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the lead on this project, understands that yes, they can happen, and they should recognize the knowledge that the tribes have, and trust the fact that the salmon will know where to go. They will be able to spawn. But so far, the non-native partners in this thing have not come through. This is just below the Grand Coulee Dam. This is Randy Friedlander, a fish biologist with the Koval tribe. He has this tradition of every spring, when the first salmon come up the river just below the dam, he catches them, cleans them, and brings them down and throws their carcasses into the water. And he says a prayer, and he says it's a prayer to his relatives, to his grandfather, and to the salmon, apologizing for what has happened to the salmon runs, and that by putting their physical DNA into the water, that when the salmon do come back, they will recognize the scent, they will catch the spiritual DNA, and they'll know which way to go. So he was saying this really beautiful prayer while I was watching him do it. So it was a real honor to witness this. So we're kind of speeding through the river here, because I have a lot to talk about. But Dog Mountain, everyone knows how beautiful it is in the spring with the wildflowers, but I love going up there when the weather forecast calls for unstable weather, because I know what that means. It means at some point there's going to be a magical break in the weather, and this was one of those things where I waited out a rain and sleet storm, and just as the sun was setting, it cleared just a little bit. So for purposes of my book project, I wanted to show something of the Columbia River Gorge that was a little different than your typical wildflower shot from Dog Mountain. And this is at the confluence of the Columbia River and the Pacific Ocean. Many of you maybe have been here before. This is at Cape Disappointment State Park on the Washington side. This is one of those moments where the forecast they had called for, it was a high tide, full moon, king tide, and I went down there trying to photograph hurling waves, but it was raining so hard. I laid in the ground, got soaked for about 6 hours. So the best I could do was get a photograph of the mist that was swirling around the cliffs there. Oops. Where are we going now? Oh, hold on. Is there a way to pause this, Mark?
Try hitting your space bar.
I didn't. Oops. Okay, hold on. I'm gonna speak and then try to get back to that. So what I'm doing now is shifting to my 10 years of volunteer work in Nepal. What you're about to see is just a very short minute and a half trailer to a film project that first brought me to Nepal 10 years ago. The film is called Kumari, A Father's Dream. It took 10 years to produce, and it traveled the world this year in the 2023 Banff Film Festival, winning all kinds of awards. I was one of the still photographers working on this project 10 years ago. I was invited to go. I paid my own way to go, and it was an eye-opening experience, and it started my 10-year love affair with Nepal. So let me see if I can go back and play you this video. Let's see. Okay. Do this again, Mark. Keep going.
Hit your space bar again.
Okay, listen up. Listen. This is a film trailer.
When I was guiding somewhere in the mountain, and at that time, my father, he fallen from the hill. That night, actually, we were sitting all parents and children together, and he was telling me, if you can do something here, bring clinic here and help us here. This is my journey to make successful my father's dream and my dream. When I stepped out from Kumari, then I could see what things we need for the basic life. Just 5 years ago, we didn't have anything here. From your perspective, have I heard that? Have I heard that? Fix that. This is the thing. This is the things I have done.
Yeah, that still gets me every time. I like to say I went to Nepal thinking I was going to fall in love with the mountains, but in the last 10 years, I've fallen in love with the people and the culture, and that's why I continue to go back. So this picture you're seeing now. This was the opening day ceremony. It was March of 2023, and the clinic is off there in the foreground. There, all the tents there were for our crew, and it was an amazing experience. For most people had never ever seen a doctor before or a dentist, which are both on hand. They're used to seeing a shaman, or not a witch doctor, but more of a natural healer. So this was a very incredible experience for me to watch these people approach this clinic, some who had walked 2 and 3 days just to get here. And this was on opening day, this long line of people getting ready to see a doctor, for the first time, and people with just all kinds of ailments that would just make you cry seeing it. Here's one gentleman who lost his leg a long time ago, and he's just so grateful to be able to have it looked at and being taken care of by volunteer doctors from the U.S. So after spending several days there, the other part of our trip was we were able to trek to the Everest Base Camp area to document some of the expedition and guiding that the man we did the film about, Jagat Lama, did. And for me, it was quite a thrill to be able to hike up to 18,500 feet and stare across at Mount Everest. I mean, after what happened to me with my heart surgery, I wasn't sure I would ever even be able to climb Mount Hood again. So be able to, in my late 50s at that time, to be able to stand at 18,000 feet and stare across at Mount Everest, that was just really, really incredible. So that was 2013. 2 years later, you may recall there was a massive 8.0 earthquake that damaged so many places in Nepal. And unfortunately, one of the hardest hit areas was this village that we filmed 2 years prior. The medical clinic was damaged. Nearly 300 homes were flattened. And to make a long story short, I was heartbroken when I heard about this. I was able to raise close to $25,000 in a 24-hour period when I was living in Hood River. But the biggest donation came from an individual who said, I'll give you the money, but I want proof that the materials that you need to buy to rebuild the village actually happens. So in the middle of monsoon season, I got on a plane and flew to Nepal. And basically my job was to take pictures of everything from when they loaded the supplies in Kathmandu, when they drove it out on these, never-ending roads from hell going out to this rural village of Kumari, and then dropping off all the supplies. And you can see these are really heavy, long pieces of tin. But the surprising thing to me was that, as I've learned over the years, that women do most of the backbreaking work, where the men kind of stand around and just pretend to be in charge and smoke cigarettes. And so these women were very resilient, couldn't wait to get their materials to bring down to where they could rebuild their homes. And just a close-up of this to me is like the face of strength and resilience. These are just people who are just determined that, okay, just because stuff happens, we're going to go forward and rebuild. And these things, I mean, I couldn't even barely pick one of these up. I tried. These are like maybe 8 feet long, and these women were just picking this stuff up, putting it on their shoulders, hiking for hours, going downhill, sometimes a day or two. I was just so impressed with their determination to rebuild. So while they were rebuilding, I took a walk. I was following some of the women. I came across this woman who was, it's hard to see in the background, but those little piles of brown, that's dried cow dung that they stored in big piles to use as fuel. And we couldn't communicate. I didn't speak any Nepali, didn't speak any English, but we just hung out and smiled and laughed and talked together. And I just love this image of her just hanging out, taking a cigarette break, just kind of silently communicating with me. So during that 2015 visit, I was introduced to this young woman, Sumitra Taman. And my friend Jagat had told me that she had this dream to become the first woman from her village to go to college, to get a degree, and come back and be the first woman leader from this village. And I was so taken with her story because Jagat asked me to interview her. And I just asked her one simple question. I said, what is your dream? And she started crying, and I thought, oh no, did I say something wrong? Was I offensive in some way? And Jagat said, oh no, no one has ever asked her that question. And so I was just taken aback, and the more I learned about her, I was just really impressed with her. So another long story short, when I came back to Hood River, I approached the Hood River Rotary and I asked them if they had any interest in supporting the international project. And I told her story, and lo and behold, they put up all the money to fund the full college scholarship for her in Nepal. Now, granted, it's a lot cheaper. It's only $5,000 versus, $50,000, $60,000 here, but still, it gave her an opportunity to start her life. And so she is now well on her way to completing that degree. She had to stop when COVID came along, but she inspires me every day, and we stay in touch, and I'm honored to be called an honorary member of their family. But this is the stuff that keeps me going back. Every time I go, I meet some new project, some new person, someone who inspires me, and I feel called to just try to do what I can. So as Joe mentioned recently, I just went to Nepal. I got back a little over 2 weeks ago. In Sisters, Oregon, if any of you ever have a reason to go through there is a restaurant called High Camp. It's actually called High Camp Tap House, and it is run by Pema and Norbu Sherpa. This couple from Nepal came to the United States, I think in the early 90s, college education, and decided to stay here. So they are fully immersed in the American way of life, but they retain their connections to Nepal And Pema, the woman in the middle, she is a dental hygienist by profession. And I got to meet them, gosh, not that long ago. It was only July when I went down to their house to say hello and have this long conversation. Turns out they were going to Nepal this fall, and they invited me to come with them because they were going to go to this isolated place of Nepal that no Westerners go to. It's down near the India border, to do some volunteer work with this community called the Musahars. And the Musahars literally translates into rat eaters. And rat eaters is because this community is similar to the caste system in India, where they're viewed upon as the lowest of the low, the like bottom scum. They're ignored, they're isolated, mistreated, abused, and nobody goes there except these people who have been doing volunteer work there, doing free dental work. They've got nursing care there. They've tried to support kids. So when they invited me, I thought to myself, well, gosh, I can't afford to go. But on the other hand, I can't afford not to do this for my soul. They've asked me to go because of my photojournalism capabilities. I thought maybe I could help them and tell some kind of story. So off I went. And so these are kids in this village, have never seen a dentist before. This is so Pamela is giving them, I think, like a fluoride application, but what you can't see from this image, it was just utter chaos. There are like 50 kids all crammed into this small little, mud house room, and their teenage moms are all kind of talking and just laughing at the same time. And these kids also had never seen a toothbrush before. So you can see the woman on your left, she has a toothbrush and she's going to hand out toothpaste. So it was pretty amazing for me to watch these kids trying to figure out how to use a toothbrush. One of the other things that Pema and Narbu was able to do with support, I think, from a Rotary in the Bend area, was bring donated school supplies and book bags and uniforms. So these are the kids in this one-room schoolhouse in the village, along with their teacher, and they were so excited. You should have seen them putting the clothes on. They just were so thrilled. And here is Pema talking to some of the teenage moms who have had no experience, no information about menstruation and healthcare for women's health. And she was trying to explain to them how to use these products. It was startling to me because I learned that sometimes when women are going through menstruation, they're ostracized. They're forced to leave the village and go be put in this, really dimly lit sort of 4x4 wall and stay inside there for a couple of weeks because they're shunned upon. And the tragedy of this is that sometimes, people die from the lack of hygiene and healthcare. So in addition to her dental hygiene proficiency, she has the ability to try to educate women about other issues. So again, my job was just to bear witness and take photographs. And at some point this winter or next spring, I'll give a lecture either in Bend or somewhere in Portland to try to raise money and awareness for them. But it was a remarkable experience. Again, I may have been the only, Westerner to have ever been to this place before, because it's off the map. It's not a tourist destination. It's just to hell and gone. And you can see in this photo, if you look closely, the two ladies in the front, they're very pregnant, and they're all teenagers. What happens in this community too is that young girls are sort of are sold off to marriage at an early age. And when I was in this community, I was looking around. And I was like, "Where's the men?" Because there's no work there. They go off to India and to Qatar to do hard manual labor, so they're hardly ever around, and they rarely send money back home. So it's a rather bleak situation. So, I'm speed dialing here through my life as a photographer. So when this was over, I came back, like first week in November, and I kept thinking, I hope there's still a little bit of fall color left. I wasn't able to get up to the mountain or do anything, but there's that. As you all know, the tree at the Japanese gardens is sort of like the crack cocaine of that place. It's really irresistible to go and check out. And every year I try to get some magic, and I'm happy with this. But I also am drawn to the more abstract possibilities. The little pond, I think that little waterfall is called Heavenly Falls. I've always been drawn to try to do something creative where do a long exposure with the swirling leaves, and in the foreground, those thicker colored patterns, those are koi moving through the shot. So I can't remember if it was 8 seconds, 10 second photograph, whatever. But what I love about that place is it provides so many opportunities to do a traditional photography and just to be extremely creative. So I came across this quote many years ago, and it's taped to my PC. And whenever I'm going through a period of questioning what am I supposed to do when I grow up, I look back at this quote. Where the needs of the world intersect with your talent, there lies your purpose. And I chose photography as a way of life 30 years ago. But prior to that, my training and background was social work and psychology, and so to be at this point in my life now where I can kind of do full circle moment where I'm combining my photography abilities with storytelling and trying to support projects that speak to my heart. Yeah, I go back to this quote often. So I told Mark I would put this up at the very end. Perhaps later on there's a way to get some of these links to you, so you can find out a little bit more about my background. There's a interview with KATU AM Northwest about my state parks project. There's an interview with them also about the Columbia River project, and the Oregon Field Guide did a story about my bouncing back from open heart surgery. I was thinking of showing it here, but it was 9 minutes. I didn't want to bore you guys. So anyway, that is it for my presentation. We were standing in an audience in an auditorium somewhere right now. It'd be fun to have questions and answers and maybe do a book signing, but I know this is best we can do for now. So anyway, so thank you, Mark.
Well, we can certainly do questions and answers, and I'll ask the first question. What's next?
Well, what's next? Coming up in mid-December, Joe had made mention that the Oregon Historical Society had commissioned me last year for a project that they're calling Portland Then and Now. In their archive, they came across 15 images that were made somewhere between 70 and 100 years old, rather just sort of everyday scenes in Portland, not your iconic shots from Pittock Mansion or your eye candy shots. They were just sort of everyday scenes, street intersections, various things. And they said, we'd like you to try to go out and a couple things, see if these views still exist, see if you can find them, and then try to create, a modern day view of these things that are aesthetically pleasing. Well, I mean, it was quite the challenge, because if you recall, last winter went on like forever, from like November through April, with this really crappy rain and weather. So it was a different challenge for me to be going downtown almost every day waiting for better weather. But it was an interesting project. I noticed that the biggest thing for me in terms of changes of 100 years, I mean, the amount of graffiti and homelessness. So many of the locations where I was supposed to shoot a particular intersection, there was a homeless camp there. So I had to keep waiting for the camps to move and this and that. But yeah, it was a good project. The next one after that is either going to start sometime next year or 2025. I'm going to be commissioned to do a 6-month exhibit on the centennial of Pacific Coast Highway, all of 101 in Oregon. In 1926, that road got its official designation as a scenic highway, or whatever the official designation is. So OHS wants to do a commission project on that. So I've got a couple of projects, at least for the next couple of years, part-time. So I don't know what else is going to happen. Maybe another trip to Nepal at some point, but for now, that's what I know.
Sounds like you'll stay busy. Other people have questions.
Peter, I have a question. This is Giannis Miglops, and thank you for sharing like the work that you do, and it's really.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
No, you may not remember, but we met many years ago because you've done books with Graphic Arts Center, and I remember your book on wine. So it's nice to see your face.
Yes, thank you. And it's like one of the tough parts of what you're doing is how do you balance, like the need for, especially here in the United States, like to be financially sustainable and still follow your heart.
Oh, oh, maybe my next life I'll have the answer to. I'll figure that one out. Boy, I don't know. I mean, you know from your own life. I mean, it's a tough thing to do. I mean, there have been times when periods have been dry when I went back to when I was in college. I painted houses and paid my way through college. I mean, I've done that every now and then, but you have to be kind of just really resourceful and creative and just keep putting ideas out there and hope that one of the things that you suggest to someone sticks. But as you know from your own work on books, I mean, there were a number of books that I wanted to do, but I had to go out and fundraise. And I was able to do that. I don't know how I pulled it off, but I would marry my idea with a potential corporate entity to see if it would match something that they would like to support, that they would like to be viewed as supporting a worthy project. So like the Columbia River Project was funded by various tribes or the Oregon Historical Society. I just reached out to all these different people and tried to be creative as possible, because when you have a dream and you want to bring it to fruition, but you're penniless, you have to get resourceful. So that's somehow, some way, I just sort of been just stayed with the dream and just kept putting the word out there. But things usually come together not in a time frame that I like. It's usually last minute and very stressful.
Well, good on you, and keep up your heart's work. It's like inspirational, and I certainly appreciate hearing what you've done.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Coming from you, that's an honor. Thank you, Giannis.
Other questions or comments?
Well,
I agree with Giannis.
Giannis,
That was Giannis. I was just going to say I agree with you. It was quite inspiring. Go ahead.
It is, and Peter, like kind of having been in your shoes with a number of projects and stuff like that is like, oh man, just keep going. I mean, stuff will happen. Like the universe is going to take care of you. And it might not be exactly the way you want. You might not get your Ferrari, but like the universe will take care of you. And it's like I remember I was in Nepal in 1976, and I hiked up the Kaligadunk to Muktinath, and then we snuck into Mustang. And like this Dutch doctor and I were like the first guys that had, or one of the first guys that had official permits to do that. And like there were so many people, and I happened to had learned a little bit of Nepali, and I happened to have a dictionary. And I was hiking with the doctor, and we were just hiking, and there was some kind of eye disease going through like the whole area. And it was so amazing to treat like this eye disease that was, just, go just kind of whipping right through the area like a big wind, and it was so nice to be able to translate like what the doctor would, tell these people how to take care of like this particular issue, so keep up the good work, and the universe is with you.
I appreciate the encouragement, Giannis. You have the timing of your comments is particularly important to me right now. As you know, well, being in Nepal in 1976 is a world of difference from what it is now. You would probably be disappointed in how discovered it is. But every time I have gone, I come back, I find reentry into our spoiled way of life, our culture, difficult. In this particular trip, because there was so much emphasis on doing volunteer work. There was some other stuff I did, but I could only had time to show you a little bit. It really has messed with my head big time about being content living here. So I'm still in that sort of funky transition stage of, wanting to spend half my life in Nepal and half my life here. But as you say, I appreciate just keep dreaming, keep thinking, don't let go of things. And things have a way of working out, but you usually have no clue how it's going to happen. It's a big leap of faith. But thank you again.
Thank you.
Peter.
Hi.
Hi, Peter. This is Kathleen Wendland, and I just want to thank you. I wrote down the words to that quote, where the needs of the world intersect with your talent, there lies your purpose. That was very inspiring. And also your the chutzpah you have to fund your projects is the nitty-gritty of it. I really appreciated hearing that as well.
Well,
And in addition to all of your work. Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, chutzpah is one word. I also call it like insane, because you get rejected so many times, but you just have to keep with it. And what I found what would work is that I would get one entity to come on board at a certain level. Then when I reached out to the next potential entity, I would say something like, so join with so and so. So it's hard to get that first one. But then when you get one sponsor, that usually opens up the doors to someone else, because it's often that corporations or people, they don't want to be the first one. They want to fund something that looks like it's going to be a success. Sort of like fundraising 101. But yeah, you just have to be passionate about what you're interested in, and hopefully that passion comes through in an authentic way. And it's just that you just never know who you're going to be talking to. If you're talking to some marketing person or some CEO and you have no idea what their life story is, and you find out that they have a connection with a tribe or they have a connection with something else that inspires them to support the project. So you just never know what's going to happen. You just have to put stuff out there. And like I was saying before, I don't know where it comes from, but I just have a lot of faith that things are going to work out. But it's not for the faint of heart, this way of life, that's for sure. So thank you again.
Thank you. Those are great insights too.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Peter, I want to thank you for putting this program together and taking the time to meet with us. Wish your camera had worked, but your program was great without us being able to see you. I'm assuming that if someone wants, yeah, go
Mark,
ahead.
this is Giannis again. Can I ask you one other like kind of quick question? Like when you're traveling and you're traveling a lot, and it sounds like some of your trips like you're throwing your gear together pretty well. What kind of recommendations would you have for what kind of gear to take, like when you're going to Nepal or just pick any other kind of pretty remote place?
Oh, wow. Boy, that's such a subjective question, and I can only speak to what works for me. It's not going to be a universally, welcome way of doing things.
Peter, I wasn't asking the photography god. I was asking Peter.
Okay. Well, let's put it this way. The advancement of the iPhone, at first I was kind of snobbish about it, like, oh, that's not a real camera, blah, 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 But in recent years, the iPhone 14 Pro, particularly for mountain climbing stuff that I do, I have embraced it as far as gear. No longer hauling tripods and heavy ass Nikon cameras up to the top of mountains. I still do that occasionally, but for really high altitude climbing, because I still do that a lot. That's a passion thing for me. I've really embracing the use of iPhones for that kind of thing, because as you know, with some of these more modern phones, you can shoot it in RAW, and you can create a 300 megabyte file from an iPhone, which is ridiculously unfair. It's just ridiculous. But boy, for the other stuff, like for my Healing the Big River project, I was still shooting film when I first started that in 2007, but I eventually shifted to a Nikon D850. I've been using that for the last several years. I usually go as light as possible. When I go for a couple of days into the wilderness, I'm just ridiculous about cutting weight. I carry very little food. But traveling to Nepal would be an example of I just went really light, and it may have changed from when you've been there almost 50 years ago. You can hike from hut to hut these get houses, these tea houses. You don't have to carry a sleeping bag or anything, because they have blankets and pretty comfortable. Well, for me, comfortable, just a basic plywood on the floor and a thin little mattress, but these really warm blankets. So I don't carry a whole lot of gear. I try to eat with the locals. I try to connect with the local people and stay away from the tourist crowds. I feel like I'm kind of rambling here, Giannis, but it really depends on each particular project or venture or outing. So it's a mixed bag of everything. But overall, I try to go as light as possible. And unfortunately, my beloved Toyota Tacoma, which I had for over 22 years, died on me two years ago at 455,000 miles. And I lived in that thing.
Wow.
I slept in the back of it. Now I'm driving a tiny little 2009 Subaru Forester, which is not the most comfortable place for sleeping and camping, but I do it.
Yeah, there's an awful hump there in the back, isn't there?
Oh, you know it. Yep, I have padding in there. It doesn't quite do it, but oh well. As my mom used to say, you can sleep when you're dead. Don't worry about it.
All right. I guess we're going to go ahead and wrap things up a little early. Thanks
Right.
again, Peter. I'm sure if someone wants to talk to you about helping with fundraising, they can reach out to you to email address on the screen here.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just go to my website and all my contact information is there. And my website is not all that current, but it's a basic place. I'm not much of a social media person either, so I do Facebook. You can find me there sometimes too.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for coming to the meeting. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving this week. And I hope to see people on December 4th at our prints exchange.
Mark, can
Good
I
night,
just
everyone.
say, Mark,
Go
first,
ahead.
I just want to say thank you to you and the board for the wonderful work that you guys have done this past year. It's been a joy. The meetings have been incredible. The speakers have been phenomenal. It's been inspirational, and I know that it's a lot of work. So I really appreciate what you and the team have done. Thank you, and hats off, to all of you.
Here,
Well,
here,
thanks, John.
Jonas. Well said.
All right, everybody. Thanks, Jonas. And there were a lot of people, like you said, that made that happen. We're all looking forward to doing it again next year. So everybody have a great evening. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Good night.
Bye-bye.